Welcome to podcast name here. We're working on it. I'm your host, Mike. With me today are PhantasyPen, Kayblis, and unseenmage. A little bit about myself. I've started playing 3.5 back in 2000. I've been almost exclusively the DM since then. I once DM'd a campaign of the world's largest dungeon. Moving on, PhantasyPen.
Hello, I'm PhantasyPen. I started playing when I was 16. I gathered three of my friends together and created a undead apocalypse one-shot. And I've been in love with the hobby ever since.
And Kayblis.
Hello, I'm Kayblis. I've been playing for about 10 years now. Have played many other systems other than 3.5, but it's my favorite system.
And unseenmage.
Hello, I'm unseenmage. I've been playing D&D since about 2002. I've been exposed to other systems, but really 3rd edition and Pathfinder always really caught my fancy.
Without further ado, tonight we'll be talking about 4 base classes. Each one we just chose ourselves because we enjoy them. I'll begin by talking about the Crusader. In my mind, the Crusader is what the Paladin should have been. It's in the book Tomb of Battle. It's a great book for martial characters. It gives melee characters something to do other than just full attack again. The Crusader is interesting to me because you can customize it fluff-wise so well. It can be just about any kind of character you want it to be, but you never really have the same Crusader twice. The Tomb of Battle says the Crusader is a warrior dedicated to good, evil, law, chaos, or some other cause. So it's kind of a nice blanket statement, giving it lots of leeway to do whatever you want it to do. From a character building standpoint, it's great, because you don't have to feel pigeonholed into something like the Paladin being lawful good no matter what. Whatever faith or principle you choose to worship determines how you'll play out your Crusader. The one exception here is that you can't choose neutral. They decided that you have to devote yourself to some cause or principle, and apparently neutrality is not going to align itself with any sort of cause or principle. I'm not sure I agree with that, but whatever. That's how it is. Crusaders are generally pure melee fighters, as are the other initiators. You basically want to get to the front of the battle as quickly as you can. You actually want to take damage to inflict more damage, but I'll get into that later. The maneuvers are what the initiator classes use in battle, and the Crusader is no exception. You can give enemies penalties for not attacking you, or penalize them just for moving near you. The Crusader is a very interesting class. Dealing damage is important for maneuvers because that's how you get a lot of the secondary effects. So as you can imagine, strength is the primary ability that you need to worry about for a Crusader. Followed closely by Constitution, because you want to hit hard, but you also need to keep up your HP to take hits to fuel that extra damage, which I was mentioning before. A little background just about the classes in Tomb of Battle. They're called Martial Adepts, and they're called Initiators. I kind of flip back and forth between those titles. They use martial maneuvers in battle, which some people liken to martial spellcasting. I don't totally agree with that phrase, but I've seen it enough times that I feel like that might just be the general conception of it. The Crusader gains a new level of maneuvers every odd level up to 9th level maneuvers, much like a wizard gains spells every odd levels up to 9th level spells. However, the Crusader can initiate a maneuver every single battle, so they're per encounter, rather than you have this many per day, and they're gone. Without getting into a detailed discussion about maneuvers, I'll just go over the recovery mechanic for the Crusader, which is one big way that the Crusader sets itself apart from Warblade and Swordsage, the other two martial adepts. The Crusader has maneuvers known and maneuvers readied, and it gets confusing how it works with the Crusader because you're randomly granted readied maneuvers. So let's say at level 1 you have 5 maneuvers known, you have 5 maneuvers readied. You only start with 2 granted maneuvers, and those 2 are randomly given to you from the 5 that you have readied. Some people have a deck of cards with the maneuvers on them, and they just like shuffle the deck cards and pick it, and I like that. I really like that. Personally, I just roll to see which ones are granted, but whatever works. Arguably, the biggest ability of the class outside of the maneuvers is the Furious Counterstrike Steely Resolve ability, and that's what I was mentioning before, how the more damage you take, the more damage you dish out. So when you take damage, you can temporarily put it into your delayed damage pool. The more damage that you have in your delayed damage pool, then the more damage you can put out for that round, and then at the end of the round, you take that damage in full. And the amount that you can put into your delayed damage pool increases as your level increases. Some other abilities are not nearly as interesting. They're good to have. They kind of help along the way, but they're nothing impressive. So Indomitable Soul adds charisma to will saves. Zealous Surge allows you to re-roll a single saving throw once per day. Smite, it's Smite. Add charisma to attack, level to damage. Die Hard as defeat. Metal negates a lesser effect on a successful will save or fort save. So none of those are all that interesting. They're good, they're helpful, but they're not the crux of the class. They're not iconic for the class. They're just there. You kind of forget about them, basically. So the maneuvers are how you really define your Crusader. The Crusader has the fewest disciplines. I believe there are 9 disciplines. Might be 8. Actually, I forget now. But the Crusader only gets 3 of them. Devoted Spirit, Stone Dragon, and White Raven. All 3 Martial Adept classes get Stone Dragon. So, nothing too interesting there. White Raven is also accessible to Warblade, but Devoted Spirit is strictly Crusader access. So, since there are only 3 disciplines, you can pretty much take multiple maneuvers from each discipline as you're leveling up and kind of get something out of it. A different class like Sword Sage has access to 6 disciplines, and a Sword Sage would kind of have to specialize a bit more because you can't really get a good amount of maneuvers out of all 6 disciplines. So, if you were going to focus with the Crusader on, say, Stone Dragon, then you're really focusing on dealing damage. That's what Stone Dragon is basically about, just dealing damage for the most part. And then if you're going to focus on White Raven, that's more group-oriented. There are a lot of leading the charge type maneuvers where multiple allies can go charge with you. You can do things like changing the initiative order for your allies. And then lastly, with Devoted Spirit, that's all about tanking and healing. There are a bunch of healing maneuvers, and also some shield-based maneuvers, which I think it might be the only discipline with shield-based maneuvers, but I could be wrong about that. There's definitely tons more to say about maneuvers, but that is a different discussion. I've only ever had 2 times where I was a player, and one of them was a Crusader, and I had a lot of fun with my Crusader. He was Bombadil, Crusader of Palor, and he wasn't too bright, but he knew how to fight and protect his allies. Bombadil would just stay in the background of planning sessions until they started talking about fighting, and then Bombadil was all for it. He was ready for a fight. So that was a lot of fun. He really got to focus on what he was doing. It was a long time ago, so I kind of forget a lot of the details about it, but I did have a lot of fun with that. So more currently, I use Crusaders as opponents for my players, and that's a lot of fun because when you build a Crusader really well, it can really put a hamper on a group of PCs. But I'm going to open up the floor for everybody else to talk about the Crusader.
Mike, when we were talking about this episode, I was surprised that you picked the Crusader over the Warblade or the Sword Sage. If only because, as you said, the Crusader has probably the most complicated mechanic when it comes to handling maneuvers out of the 3 of them.
Yes, yes. It is definitely the most confusing until you've really used it, I'll say. When I see people talk about the Crusader, there's almost always confusion, almost always discussion about how it actually works before people can agree, like, oh, this is what's supposed to happen. And part of that confusion is because the Warblade and the Sword Sage basically work the same way. I mean, it's not identical, but it's, you have known maneuvers and you have a set of readied maneuvers. That's it. You pick the ones you want. Whereas with the Crusader, sure, you're picking the ones you want, but you might not get the ones you want granted. So it's not intuitive, for sure.
I'd agree with that, and I just like to say I really like the Crusader. To me, it's a well-designed class, and it's very different from the other initiators because, well, how can I put this? It has a nice mix of active and passive skills. His biggest ability, the Furious Counter-Strike. He, as you can see, his ability is actually a passive one. It always activates when he takes damage, but all his active skills are mostly around negating damage, of healing damage. And you can make a very strong Crusader with only one feat. It's Stone Power, that gives him temporary HP that gets depleted before his actual HP when your turn ends.
Yeah, it's definitely true. And also, I like that you bring up the fact that he's got a good balance of passive and active. Because now that I think about it, like, pretty much all of his abilities are passive. But because it's an initiator, he's very active using all the maneuvers. And since he's a Crusader, he's never going to be out of maneuvers because if you run out, then you're just granted more. So it really does work out well. I think that's why I like it so much, is because the Crusader, even more so than the others, always has something he can do. But if that's all we have to say about the Crusader, then we can just move on to PhantasyPen's class.
Thank you, Mike. For my class, I chose the Dragon Shaman, the much maligned, much obscure Dragon Shaman. The Dragon Shaman is one of 3.5's well, really one of its two it's two dragon-based classes alongside the Dragonfire Adept, its much more popular cousin. In terms of flavor, a Dragon Shaman is a priest of the true dragons, a cultist who emulates the strength of a specific dragon breed, which you choose as your totem. The Dragon Shaman is unique to 3.5 and 3rd edition in general, although some elements of the class were added to the Draconic bloodline for sorcerers in later editions. At first glance, the Dragon Shaman looks like it should be a frontline character. It has a D10 hit die, and it can be quite tanky thanks to a combination of heavy shields, medium armor, and the class's own natural armor, which scales as you level up. But where the Dragon Shaman really shines is as a support character. The Dragon Shaman's tanky traits, they're really there to keep you in the game longer. What your real purpose is will be helping your allies, acting as a force multiplier for their own abilities. Out of the box, this is about as much as the Dragon Shaman can do. the core dragon options don't have that much variety between them. Quite literally, half of them just give you water breathing and some form of breath weapon. But when you bring in dragons from outside of core, typically the ones from the Draconomicon or the Dragons of Faerun sourcebook, well, you're still going to be a support character, but your secondary role can change drastically depending on what you're picking. My personal favorite non-core dragon option is the Battle Dragon. And when you use a Battle Dragon Shaman, you become something of a hybrid of the Bard and Barbarian. And it creates probably the most interesting dynamic in actual play. As you level up in this class, you will gain several iconic abilities and immunities of the dragon creature type, including the real reason you picked this class, which is their signature breath weapon. The Dragon Shaman's breath weapon is one of the few ways that will natively allow players access to the very powerful and flavorful category of meta breath feats. These are found primarily in the 3rd edition book, the Draconomicon. Meta breath feats add new and oftentimes more interesting effects to a creature's breath weapon, albeit at the cost of increasing the cooldown time. Outside of their breath weapon, the primary calling card of the Dragon Shaman are the so-called Draconic Auras. These are a collection of supernatural buffs that grant various benefits to the Dragon Shaman and their allies that are within range. Occasionally, only when certain conditions can be met, however. Because the Dragon Shaman has so few Draconic Auras, any given Dragon Shaman will eventually get all 7. So the question is not which auras should you select, but rather in what order you want to get them in. Which ones do you want to use more often and focus on? The Energy Shield aura is a very nasty retributive ability, particularly if your DM is like me and they like using enemies that have a very large number of natural attacks. As when a creature hits you with an attack roll using a non-reach melee weapon, they automatically take damage based on the strength of your aura, with no attack rolls or saving throws on your part. The Power Aura is a decent force multiplier for a melee-oriented party. And because it's a static bonus, it can be modified by abilities that multiply damage, such as a critical hit or the Spirited Charge ability. This can be very important for many high damage melee builds. The Presence and Sense auras are effectively the same thing. The Presence aura gives a bonus to your social skills, while the Senses aura increases your ability to perceive things. Both are very good utility auras to have, and can be activated as a swift action, unlike most magical equivalents, which must be prepared in advance and often have finite uses, unlike your auras. The resistance aura is, simply put, just gives you energy resistance. And after level 9, it's often going to be more useful for your allies than for yourself. Similar to the resistance aura, we have the toughness aura, which gives you damage reduction against non-magical weapons. For people that have played 5th edition, the aura that is going to be most familiar is the Vigor aura. The Vigor aura gives you the ability to recover damage every round using fast healing. However, it only applies to characters that are at half of their maximum HP or less. Despite the potential versatility of the Dragon Shaman, its powers become very limited if you don't work with your DM. If you are restricted solely to the core dragon variants that the class provides on its own, you really won't get outside of the support role / pseudo tank that the Dragon Shaman claims as its primary niche. In order to access the more interesting variants of Draconic adaptation, you and your DM have to be willing to look at some of the more exotic supplementals. As I said earlier, my first experience with D&D, I was the DM. But my first player character, Pyrrhus Volcanus, was a Dragon Shaman, a follower and herald of a mighty Mercury dragon that lived in his desert homeland on the other side of the mountains from where our campaign was set. If you use a Dragon Shaman as an NPC, it's important to remember that the Dragon Shaman themselves shouldn't be the centerpiece of the battle. They are a support character. They shine when they are lifting up others, rather than on their own.
Cool. One thing I just wanted to add, I think you left out that the, what is it, senses. Yeah, the senses aura also increases initiative. Yeah, I like to have that active just as a boost to initiative at all times. You never know when battle's going to start. And also,
Very true.
Yeah.
Very true.
in my mind, it would also be really good if you could somehow qualify as a true dragon, or maybe just dragon-blooded, just so you can take a lot of the dragon feats that are in, was it in the Draconomicon?
Oh, yes, those require you to be a true dragon, though. So,
Yes.
I'd like to ask one thing. Yeah, anywhere in the fluff or in the lore, have you found anything of how the Dragon Shaman deals with true dragons? If they see them as gods, as deities, as lords, if they can serve one directly? How do they relate like that?
that is up to the dragon shaman in question. Some worship the dragons, as you said, but there are others who seek to slay the dragons. And they believe that by partaking in the dragonkind's power, they are gaining a deeper understanding of their ultimate foe.
I did want to mention that one of my favorite things to do with the meta breath was to animate it.
Somehow that doesn't surprise me.
And you mentioning that the martial type characters shouldn't be the center of attention made me wonder, what if the Dragon Shaman was all by themselves? Agent Smith style aura users just sound kind of terrifying.
Yes, the ability to create your own minions on a class designed quite entirely around making others stronger is a terrifying concept.
Worse if they're all yourself via spamming simulacrum or something like that.
Yes, but the Dragon Shaman is not a spellcaster, sadly. They won't be able to do that on their own.
Shall we move on to Unseen Mage's character?
Well, lucky for the Dragon Shaman, my class could easily build them something that would allow them to make many of themselves. I chose the Artificer as the Artificer base class, found in the Eberron campaign setting. They make stuff, lots of stuff, all of the stuff if you let them. Other classes can make magic items, usually as a departure from what they're used to. But that's what the Artificer is designed for. From heal potions to magic robots, the Artificer gets enough magic item creation feats and skill points to build just about anything. Which is also part of the trouble with Artificers. With potential access to every spell, item, and even creature in the game, they have nearly unlimited potential. With enough cash and time, an Artificer can go to the moon. Deny an Artificer its resources, however, and it becomes about as useful as a rogue without sneak attack. I describe the Artificer as requiring a triad of resources: money, time, and experience. Deny it any of the three, and you will pretty much ruin its day. There are a couple of other elements from the Eberron campaign setting that it seems like the Artificer was designed to also require to be truly effective. One of these is action points. Without action points, the low-level Artificer sometimes struggles to use their infusions that often have long casting times of a full minute, or sometimes even more. The other element is what's called the dedicated right homunculus, which is basically a little tiny magic robot infused with a bit of the Artificer's blood that makes magic items for him. Because magic item crafting can take a lot of time, and not every adventure has time to let the Artificer sit around and make stuff, the dedicated right can take your magic item time and use it to make items for you. In an adventure with strict time limits, or if hit with a disjunction spell, or if dropped into an animagic field, the Artificer just suffers. Because they need their toys, and they need the chance to make their toys to really shine. The more sources an Artificer is allowed, the more potentially powerful it becomes. There are web articles that allow spells like Transference, that allows you to buy and sell experience, or the Guidance of the Avatar spell, which can give you essentially True Strike for a skill, giving you a plus 20 to a skill check. Combination of source books and magazines can reduce your magic item prices and build times considerably, using the aptly called cost reducers. Artificers also gain access to prestige class spell lists, which often grant powerful spells at a much lower spell level than the base classes. On top of that, Artificers are already getting spells sooner than their other full casting counterparts, 2 levels sooner. Now they don't get to cast them, but they do get to use them and put them to items, and those items can allow them to cast them. With templates like the Effigy from Complete Arcane or the Elder Eidolon from Lords of Madness, and the Craft Construct feat, the Artificer can build a minion of almost any creature. Now, these templates strip away a lot of the creature's superpowers, but some of the superpowers remain behind and can be quite potent. Additionally, there is something called the Psionic Artificer, but opinions differ about whether it's more or less powerful than the base Artificer class. Not all Artificers are created equally. While it isn't as spelled out as, say, a Specialist Wizard, Artificers too can focus their builds to specialize. The community have given them names like Blastificer, Hordificer, Zeroficer, and the mighty Omnificer. I even tried my hand at playing an Alchemificer once. The Blastificer, as the name implies, focuses on making wands and other items that allow it to deal as much damage as it can, as fast or as often as it can. The Hordificer focuses on making lots of minions to do its dirty work, a horde, if you will. The Zeroficer doesn't make magic items at all, and is still somehow just as potent as a regular Artificer would be. While the Omnificer is infamous for being a theoretical optimization build that is said to rival the legendary Pun in both the scope of its power and low level to set it off. Pun being another theoretical optimization build that parlays low-level access to epic material into literally having every superpower in the game. That an Artificer can match that kind of power with any kind of optimization is impressive. I personally have only ever played 2 Artificers successfully in more than a one-shot game, e.g. in a campaign. The first, my first, was a mid-level. He was allowed infinite gold and access to every rule source, even third-party and some Pathfinder. He wound up accidentally making more mass in constructs than there was mass in the planet of Faerun. The second, Mao Alchemificer, Draruk, the Goblin Alchemificer, he was low level. He wasn't even allowed markets, let alone magic marts, and had an extremely limited book access. He never finished making a single meaningful item or alchemical item. Of the 2, Draruk the Goblin Alchemificer is most memorable for how I played him, how I portrayed his character. Sayaka, the Gnome Artificer, he changed that DM's game world. For the better, we're not sure.
Artificer's one of the classes I've never seen in play, but I've always found fairly interesting.
I've seen a grand total of 3 Artificers, the third one being my own attempt. I can't really say any of them got very far, but for the brief moments that they were around, they definitely had a memorable impact on the campaign.
I'll be honest, I've only had players that tried to make an Artificer because they heard of its amazing powers, of its unlimited potential, and never managed to play it out. It requires much more game knowledge than other classes.
Well,
Yeah,
I'd say that can be applied to spellcasters in general, particularly powerful ones. For example, there is a big difference between when I build a wizard and when one of my, let's say, former players would build his wizards. Even taking out their different specializations, our different levels of comprehension of the game rules and our differing levels of system mastery caused a noticeable power gap, even though we were, in theory, starting from the exact same base.
to be perfectly honest, I'm not particularly good at optimizing the character, the crunch, the numbers, the what to do each round of combat. I, however, excel at layered effects. If you say that this is possible with this, and that this is possible with this, and that one is repeatable and the other is only repeatable under certain circumstances, that I can play with, which is, to me, why I so enjoy spellcasters, because they can create those kind of situations.
Shall we move on to Kayblis' character?
Okay. What I brought to class today is the Dread Necromancer. Now, it's a class I've played a couple times and I have fond memories of them. Speaking about it, when the topic is dealing with the undead, few can hold a candle to the infamous Dread Necromancer. As a master of undeath, this class is centered around dealing with negative energy and manipulating the remains of the deceased. He was first introduced in Heroes of Horror, and he established, today, a high bar for minion-focused builds. His main class features revolve around creating and maintaining a large number of undead minions, as well as giving properties and immunities of the undead type. To start off, the base statistics are what you would expect from a full caster. It has a good will save, 2 skill points per level, it has D6 health, a bit more than the average wizard. And you're a full caster, spontaneous caster that uses charisma. You progress like the sorcerer, but unlike the wizard and sorcerer, you have lots of class features. To start off, at first level, you get a touch of negative energy, which can both be used to deal damage and to heal the undead. This gives a lot more value to each individual minion, because as long as it survives a battle, it can be healed to full in a matter of minutes. That alone reduces immensely the usual cost of necromancy, raising new undead because yours are expendable. I would like to point out that for undead players, or players with the Tom-tainted soul feat, this also means free healing to the player. You also get Rebuke Undead, you get damage reduction early on, so you have lots of options. You can survive in melee in low levels. And by level 4, you get Command Undead as a spell. This allows you to command an actual undead pool for its long duration. Every level, this class gets a new tool to its arsenal. Now, if you're going to talk about controlling undead, some things must be said. Usually, you can only control up to 4 times your level in undead hit dice. This can be discussed if it's class levels, if it's casting level. We can discuss this, but depends on the GM most of the time. This means that a level 10 character can control up to 40 hit dice of undead. That's 20 zombies or 6 troll skeletons. It's a lot. But the Dread Necromancer has a special class feature that allows him to add his charisma modifier to this 4 per level part. This means your undead pool grows with your investment in charisma, your main casting stat. This more than doubles your pool at mid levels, so you can have an army of 100 men, or raise the big monsters you fight on the way, like dragons or giants. You can even mount them. I'm not kidding, there is special material to mount zombies. And zombie dragons can fly. You can cover a lot of ground with undead. And from all the books in 3.5, your best friend will certainly be the Libris Mortis, the Book of the Undead. There you'll find feats related to undead raising, like the Corpse Crafter line, and the amazing Fel Metamagic feats that allow you to raise undead without actually investing money. And I'd like to point out something very important. This class is not for every game. Having many minions is only good if everyone is on board with that, and many DMs would not like to run a war game through D&D. The extra work piles on quickly, so you should ask your DM if this class is good for a game. And in my first time playing a Dread Necromancer, we actually turned the game into Pokemon. We caught any undead we found and managed to raise other monsters we killed. And this went on until we eventually overran every challenge with waves and waves and waves of undeads and zombies and skeletons. It was a great game.
I like the Dread Necromancer. I had one player as a Dread Necromancer in a game, and it was interesting. The game didn't last too long, so I didn't get to even see mid-levels, but it was definitely a fun class. He enjoyed it, so...
Yeah, you can also make some pretty messed up things, like there are some special undead you can carry around, like the Slaymates that reduce metamagic costs. You can also use undead battery to pay for metamagic with your undead. You sacrifice them to cast a spell that raises more undead, and it goes on and on and on.
I like that you slowly become more and more undead as you level up in the class.
Oh yeah, the level 20, the capstone ability, is you literally become a lich.
I enjoy playing Undead Masters as well. Not as much as I enjoy playing Golem Masters, but still. That they have so oftentimes multiple different pools of undead they pull from. This ability lets them control this many, this ability lets them control this many. It can get pretty complicated pretty fast, but at the same time, it can be a lot of fun to figure out which pool to control which undead with.
Yeah, when you get to high levels, you actually have more than one of that pool. So you actually have to manage them around.
Alright, so that's what we have for tonight. Once again, it was me, Mike, along with PhantasyPen,
Good night, y'all.
Kayblis,
Thanks for having me.
and unseenmage.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time.